Standing before the colossal estate, the morning air felt unnervingly still. Straightening my freshly pressed collar, I took a deep, steadying breath, trying to mentally prepare myself for the suffocating weight of serving high nobility. Every step through the silent, gilded corridors echoed with sickening luxury, until I finally reached the towering double doors. Swallowing the knot in my throat, I offered a quiet, practiced knock before gently pushing them open. The moment my eyes met hers, a chilling memory resurfaced, the haunting image of her dragging me into a suffocating, almost desperate embrace, showering me with an obsessive affection that belonged nowhere near the girl destined to become this world's most ruthless villainess. Jerking back to reality, a cold sweat broke across my neck. I forced a stiff, unnatural smile, completely paralyzed by the sheer weight of the unhinged possessiveness burning in her eyes. Leaning forward with an impatient glare, she narrowed her gaze, her voice sharp and demanding as she snapped to ask if my mind was wandering instead of hanging on her every word. How could it not? Deep down, the terrifying truth constantly gnawed at me. This entire world was nothing more than an otome game, a grand theatrical stage, where dazzling heroes and the destined heroine were supposed to bask in glory, while the villainess orchestrated their downfall from the shadows. That original image of her was forever burned into my mind. A cold, untouchable schemer resting her chin in absolute arrogance, looking down on the world with pure, calculating cruelty. Yet on this grand chessboard of power and deceit, I was never meant to be a player. I was a complete nobody. An unnamed background mob meant to fade quietly into the scenery and disappear without consequence. From the very beginning, wandering the dusty cobblestone streets as an orphan, I always knew the cold truth. I possessed no noble bloodline, no divine blessing, and no sacred destiny waiting to unfold. In every fantasy tale of reincarnation, the chosen protagonist awakens with supreme intellect, devastating magic, or godlike strength that bends the world to their will. But fate hadn't spared a single miracle for me. The harsh reality was far more pathetic. I couldn't even clearly recall who I was before opening my eyes in this world. All that lingered were shattered, faded fragments, hazy memories of modern streets, the distant taste of simple food, and the phantom nostalgia of playing story-driven games on a small handheld screen. Stripped of status, family, or purpose, I spent my early years tucked away in a humble, sun-drenched orphanage surrounded by quiet countryside trees. I lost count of the long afternoons spent lying on the floorboards, holding my hand up against the ceiling, staring blankly past my own fingers, and desperately questioning why I was ever brought to this world in the first place. In my loneliest moments, childish fantasies would take over, making me wonder what it would feel like to command unstoppable elemental magic with a single flick of my wrist. I'd picture an exciting, glorious life, walking the pristine halls of a prestigious academy alongside legendary companions who fought for the fate of the realm. But delusions couldn't feed an empty stomach. I forced myself to bury those childish dreams, choosing instead to believe that even a lowborn commoner could carve out a proud, honest existence through sheer grit. Looking out over the rolling hills and modest cottage roofs of our village, I made peace with my lot in life, determined to make the absolute best of the ordinary cards I had been dealt. From that day on, I poured every ounce of my soul into relentless martial training, a dedication that culminated in the village square when my wooden blade shattered an adult opponent's guard with a deafening crack, slamming him flat against the dirt. Lowering the practice sword, I wiped the sweat from my eyes, breathing heavily. As a broad, earned grin broke across my face the moment the referee called the match in my favor. Massaging his bruised arm from the ground, my opponent let out a booming, breathless laugh, throwing his hands up in genuine defeat and admitting that my combat instincts were utterly terrifying for my age. The surrounding villagers erupted into roaring applause, their genuine cheers, filling the square as I stepped forward with a humble grin, offering a hand to pull the man back to his feet. Before I could even catch my breath, an eager village boy came sprinting up with starstruck eyes, balling his tiny fists and practically begging to know if he could reach that kind of strength with daily practice. I let out an awkward, sheepish laugh, carefully concealing the embarrassing truth that my obsessive training was merely the only way to escape crippling boredom in a world without modern entertainment. Playfully waving my hands to brush off the heavy praise, I joked that swinging a piece of wood around was really only useful for chasing away stray pests, not claiming some glamorous title of knighthood. A rhythmic, gentle applause broke through the laughter, and turning around, I saw our elderly orphanage director stepping forward, his wrinkled face practically glowing with quiet pride. Placing a heavy, reassuring hand upon my head, the old man looked down at me with profound warmth, softly telling me that with a sharp mind and strength like mine, I was destined to grow into an exceptional knight. His unconditional faith hit me straight in the chest, and I could only laugh awkwardly beneath his hand, overwhelmed with gratitude for the one person who had always believed in me when I had nothing. Yet, as the laughter faded, his expression darkened with a sudden heavy gravity, hesitating for a long moment before quietly confessing that he had a critical, unexpected favor to ask of me. That single request led me straight into the lion's den, sitting stiff as a board, on a velvet sofa inside the suffocatingly lavish Ashford estate, my heart hammering like a trapped bird against my ribs. Crushed by the sheer opulence of our surroundings, I leaned over to whisper in sheer panic to the director, desperately fidgeting as I muttered just how terribly out of place a commoner felt in the heart of noble territory. Before he could even offer a word of comfort, the towering double doors groaned open, and the old man quietly warned me that the master of the estate had finally arrived. Walking into the room with an aura of pure, crushing authority, Count Gerald Ashford stepped forward, commanding the space with the cold, absolute dignity, befitting the supreme ruler of the entire province. A chill ran down my spine, my stomach dropping into a pit of sheer disbelief, as the terrifying reality set in that I was breathing the same air as the highest-ranking aristocrat in the land. The Count offered a measured, dignified greeting to the director, who wasted no time proudly presenting me as an extraordinary prodigy whose sharp instincts defied my lowly birth. Drenched in nervous sweat, I sat paralyzed beneath the Count's piercing stare as he calmly revealed that word of my combat prowess had reached his ears and that this private audience was arranged for a matter of utmost importance. Resting his chin thoughtfully against his clasped hands, he locked eyes with me and dropped a demand that shattered my entire reality, asking a low-born nobody, like me, to become the exclusive attendant and personal companion to his beloved daughter, the future villainess Aurelia. The governor leaned forward against the cushions, his hands clasped firmly beneath his chin as he delivered his impossible demand. He wasn't asking for a guard or a servant. He wanted an ordinary orphan to become the personal companion and confidant to his own blood, leaving me utterly paralyzed in shock. A cold bead of sweat trickled down the back of my neck as I frantically tried to make sense of his cryptic words, specifically his lingering warning that his daughter possessed a uniquely difficult and troublesome nature. A knot of pure dread tightened in my stomach. Why would the most powerful ruler in the province go out of his way to recruit a peasant from the dirt, unless this young noble girl was so viciously unhinged or afflicted with something so horrific that no noble child dared to approach her? Before I could find an answer, he calmly lifted his porcelain cup, took a measured sip, and commanded the guards to bring her inside. The moment that prestigious family name resonated through the room, a buried memory from my past life violently struck a nerve. The heavy double doors groaned open, and a young girl stepped into the light with chilling grace. Draped in black frills and moving with absolute aristocratic poise, she sank into a flawless, formal curtsy, but the sight of her froze the breath right in my lungs. A sickening wave of terror washed over me as the forgotten puzzle pieces snapped violently into place. This frail, composed child standing before me was destined to become the story's most sadistic villainess, a ruthless monster who would torment the heroine and drown entire realms in curses out of pure spite. Staring at her delicate frame, my blood ran cold at the realization that I was looking at the future root of all evil, the final boss whose downfall was meant to be written in blood. Completely blind to the sheer panic suffocating me, her father rose with a gentle smile, warmly pushing the two of us toward the estate gardens so we could break the ice and build a lasting bond. Left with no choice, we stepped out into the sprawling courtyard, where manicured hedges, Towering stone urns and pristine brick pathways stretched beneath the blinding afternoon sun against the shadow of the manor. We walked side by side in an agonizing, suffocating silence. Desperate to shatter the heavy tension hanging between us, I forced an awkward breath and began offering shallow praise about how magnificent the grounds looked. Thinking back to her father's proud insistence that she was just a sweet, ordinary girl my age, I cautiously stole a glance at the silent figure beside me. My chest tightened as I looked at her face. Her expression was completely devoid of life. A flat, emotionless mask so chillingly empty that it seemed unnatural for someone so young. Yet beneath that wall of stone, a strange heat rushed to my face. There was a haunting, ethereal beauty to her features, framed by raven black hair that fell around deep, mesmerizing eyes that seemed to pull you into an abyss. Despite the frigid barrier she put up against the world, she possessed an undeniable magnetic aura, the unmistakable presence of someone born to command the center of this universe. Without a sound, she came to a dead halt in the middle of the path, her head sinking low under the shadow of her dark fringe, forcing me to stop and ask if something was wrong. Stepping closer, I gently reached out a hand, offering to turn back toward the warmth of the estate if she was feeling unwell. She slowly lifted her heavy, sorrowful gaze to meet mine, cutting straight through my facade by bluntly stating that she knew I had no desire to be anywhere near her. Her fingers tightened against the dark ribbon at her chest, her voice laced with bitter resignation as she assumed I was already trembling in fear of the cursed existence standing in front of me. Letting her gaze drop back to the dirt, she told me to drop the polite act, whispering that she had long since grown numb to being treated like a pariah. In that single instant, the sickening truth of her childhood laid itself bare. A life spent watching noble women whisper venomous rumors behind delicate fans, pushing their own children away from the young heiress as if she were a plague. High society had looked upon a lonely child with pure disgust and superstition, branding the darkness in her eyes and hair as an undeniable omen of a demon walking in human flesh. Even the greedy aristocrats who crawled into the estate seeking political favor would scramble back in sheer horror the second they brushed against the suffocating, unnatural aura that lingered around her. The tragedy was undeniable. The volatile, catastrophic magic coursing through her blood had terrified the world, leaving her utterly abandoned in a sea of hateful glares and shivering cowards. Turning her back to me on the sunlit path, she accepted her fate with chilling calm, murmuring that isolating herself was simply the only logical choice anyone in their right mind could make. To prove her point, she reached out a single pale finger toward a vibrant, blooming rose at the edge of the path. The instant her presence brushed the petals, the vibrant life was violently choked out, rotting the flower into pitch-black decay within seconds. A violent torrent of volatile mana erupted from her small frame, unleashing a sparkling shockwave that tore down the walkway, forcing me to throw my arms up against the howling gale. I stood there in breathless awe and sheer terror, feeling the suffocating density of a magical power so vast and destructive that it defied human comprehension. Holding up the blackened stem as it disintegrated into fine dark ash between her trembling fingers, she proved the cruel reality of her curse that anything drawn to her warmth, whether plant or living flesh, was doomed to wither and die. Turning back toward me with a faint, self-mocking smile, she softly asked if I finally understood why she was a wretched monster destined to rot in absolute solitude. Looking at this fragile, broken girl shivering in the middle of that vibrant garden, a crushing wave of fury and sorrow hit me, mourning the sheer weight of cruelty she had been forced to carry all alone. A burning revelation ignited deep inside my chest. If this relentless abandonment and hatred were the sparks destined to forge the villainess, then, refusing to run away right here and now could shatter that tragic destiny completely. Looking down at my own trembling palm as a gentle, warm light began to flicker across my skin, the fog in my mind vanished, revealing the one true purpose of my reincarnation, to stand beside this abandoned girl and protect her from the darkness consuming her life. Watching the faint, ethereal glow dance across my palm, the pieces of my existence finally began to align, leaving me to wonder if some higher power had thrust me into this world specifically for this fragile soul. In that quiet realization, A silent, unyielding vow formed within my chest. I would shatter the cruel script of this universe and carve out a path where neither of us was condemned to tragedy. In my mind, I could already see a different future. A grown version of the girl standing before me, radiant, free, and draped in pure white warmth, completely untainted by the bloody path of villainy waiting for her. Snapping back to the garden path, I locked eyes with the trembling girl in front of me, determined to tear down the walls of her misery, as I firmly declared that I didn't find her the least bit frightening or monstrous. Letting my voice ring out with reckless, unfiltered conviction, I blurted out that she was breathtakingly beautiful, shattering her defenses so completely that a vibrant crimson blush instantly engulfed her face. Dropping her gaze in flustered disbelief, she softly murmured her thanks. Yet, the deep-rooted terror in her voice betrayed her fear that her volatile, lethal curse would inevitably destroy anyone foolish enough to stay close. Gesturing down toward the blackened ash of the withered rose, I refused to look away, calmly admitting the danger of her destructive power while promising that even the darkest force could be nurtured into a shield of protection. I held my open hand out between us, giving her my absolute sacred promise that, no matter what pain or catastrophe might strike us down the road, I would stand by her side and shoulder the burden together. Cradling the freshly gathered roses against her chest, she looked up into my eyes with breathtaking vulnerability, as I softly, sincerely asked if she would grant me the honor of becoming her friend. Reaching across years of suffocating torment and bitter isolation, her trembling fingers finally pressed into my open palm, quietly sealing a profound bond between an abandoned noble heiress and her devoted attendant. Yet that tender memory violently fractured, drowning in the suffocating darkness of a childhood nightmare where distorted, venomous whispers tore into her fragile mind, branding her an omen of death and a demonic crow destined to bring ruin to everything she touched. Trapped in the agony of that memory, 5-year-old Aurelia wept in absolute terror as the cold, disgust-filled eyes of high society loomed over her like executioners. Lost in the pitch-black void of rejection, the terrified little girl reached into the shadows, sobbing hysterically and screaming at the top of her lungs for her mother to hold her. A figure emerged from the mist, but when her mother finally looked down upon the shivering child, her eyes held nothing but freezing, venomous contempt. Swatting away her daughter's tiny reaching hands in pure disgust, the noblewoman hissed at the child never to look at her with those dead, accursed eyes again, turning her back without a shred of remorse. Cast out into the freezing abyss of total abandonment, the little girl collapsed to her knees, burying her tear-stained face in her hands and desperately pleading for forgiveness in a world that offered none. Gasping violently for breath, she shot upright in bed, her eyes wide with lingering terror as her trembling fingers frantically clutched the silk sheets of her bedchamber. Sitting quietly right beside her mattress, I leaned forward with deep, protective concern, softly asking if she was all right after watching the sheer anguish that had gripped her during that horrific nightmare. Resting against the ornate headboard, she tried to gather her scattered senses, while I gently explained that she had simply collapsed into a dead sleep from pure mental exhaustion while we were talking earlier. I offered a warm, comforting smile, reassuring her that running on empty was bound to drag up ugly dreams. But the words died in my throat the moment I saw her face crumble. To my complete shock, heavy, glistening tears broke from her dark eyes, leaving her staring back at me in a state of absolute heartbreaking fragility. A wave of helpless panic swept over me as I fumbled, desperately searching for anything I could possibly say or do to wash the agony from her weeping face. Moving on pure instinct, I reached forward, gently brushing my hand against her dark hair before pulling her small, trembling frame into a tight, protective embrace, letting her bury her face into my shoulder as her sobs muffled against my chest. Feeling the steady, rhythmic beat of my heart against her cheek, the lingering phantom of her nightmare began to fade, replaced by the unshakable reality of our promised bond. Pulling back just enough to look at me, she whispered her deepest fear, confessing that clinging to a cursed monster like her would only drag my life into absolute ruin. But I instantly shut her down, swearing that standing beside her brought me nothing but pure, unadulterated happiness. When she timidly brought up her paralyzing fear of her lethal magic accidentally taking my life, I met her gaze calmly, reminding her that no two people ever walk through this world without accidentally grazing each other with pain. Her fingers twisted desperately into the fabric of her skirt, quietly urging me to abandon her and seek out anyone else in high society, prompting me to step forward and firmly grasp her trembling shoulders. Looking straight into the depths of her shimmering, tear-filled eyes, I spoke with absolute, immovable resolve, making it unequivocally clear that she was the only person in this entire universe I ever wanted to be with. Under the sheer weight of my devotion, the last remnants of her doubt melted away, and resting a hand over her racing heart, she bowed her head with a soft, radiant blush, formally accepting my companionship and asking me to look after her. Letting out a heavy, relieved breath into the quiet chamber, I playfully tapped my chest, telling her that she never needed to bow or apologize to me, and that my shoulder would always be there whenever she needed to cry. A soft, melodic laugh escaped her lips, looking up at me with profound warmth as she remarked on just how dangerously kind-hearted I truly was. I met her eyes with a tender, modest grin, telling her that I was merely doing what any true friend would do for someone they held dear to their heart. Clutching the blanket thoughtfully between her fingers, she confessed that after a lifetime of total isolation, she was terrified she wouldn't know how to be a companion worthy of someone like me. Sitting comfortably beside her on the edge of the mattress, I offered an open, reassuring gesture, explaining that true bonds don't follow rigid rules. All that ever mattered was being honest with what was in our hearts. I gave her an encouraging nod, reminding her that as she slowly opened the doors of her heart to the world, connecting with people would eventually become as effortless as breathing. Her entire face lit up with an innocent, radiant glow, resting a delicate finger against her smiling lips as she warmly agreed that we would take our newfound bond one gentle step at a time. A soft, genuine smile touched her lips as she rested a delicate finger against her chin, agreeing that we should take this fragile new bond one gentle step at a time, sending a wave of pure relief crashing through my chest. Sitting comfortably across from her in the quiet room, a sense of calm maturity washed over me, knowing that life was far too vast to rush. We had all the time in the world to grow, stumble, and truly understand each other. Gesturing openly with my hands, I began passionately explaining that real connection wasn't an overnight miracle, but a muscle built through relentless patience and mutual effort, while she simply stared back at me with wide, completely unblinking eyes. The words abruptly dried up in my throat as a drop of nervous sweat rolled down my temple, suddenly realizing that delivering a philosophical lecture on human psychology to a 7-year-old child was probably the worst way to keep a conversation going. My mind instantly drifted into an absurd, overly optimistic daydream, picturing a radically altered future, where she beamed with radiant warmth, skipping around with freshly baked pastries while using her once-feared magic to sprout vibrant bouquets of flowers out of thin air. In that same sweet delusion, I envisioned the two of us standing peacefully beneath a vast, starlit night sky, shoulder to shoulder, laughing effortlessly as we traced the glowing constellations above. A sharp, embarrassed shudder jerked me straight back to reality, cringing inwardly at the sheer, ridiculous gulf between that sugary fantasy and the brooding, stone-faced little heiress currently sitting in front of me. My reverie was instantly shattered as she leaned forward with an irritated, adorable pout, narrowing her dark eyes and demanding to know whether I was actually listening to a single word coming out of her mouth. Rubbing the back of my neck with a sheepish, awkward chuckle, I offered an immediate apology, confessing that my brain had momentarily taken an uninvited detour into its own thoughts. Crossing her arms and turning away with puffed cheeks, she let out a sharp huff, bitterly muttering whether anything in this world could possibly be more important than answering her question. Stepping forward on pure instinct, I pressed a hand firmly over my heart, flashing a bright, unwavering smile as I declared that absolutely nothing in this entire universe could ever take priority over her. The sheer theatrical weight of my overdramatic vow caught her completely off guard, instantly breaking her stubborn scowl as she desperately stifled a burst of genuine giggles behind her hands. A wave of playful pride washed over me, striking an invisible mental pose with a smug grin, quietly telling myself that delivering such absolute loyalty with pure charisma made me look undeniably cool. Desperately trying to hide her cracking composure, she turned her blushing face toward the sunlit window, clearing her throat with a flustered cough and bashfully demanding that I just answer what style of dresses I thought looked best on her. Before our lighthearted banter could continue, the heavy bedroom door creaked open, revealing her father standing in the frame, politely asking if he could borrow a few moments of my time for a private discussion. As the Count requested my presence and I turned toward the doorway, I caught a fleeting glimpse of the young heiress shooting a venomous, death-dealing glare straight at her own father for daring to interrupt our private moment. Catching me looking, she immediately spun her head around with crossed arms, putting up a wall of cold indifference and huffing that she didn't care anyway. Since my mind was already somewhere else, leaving me chuckling nervously at her stubborn, noble pride. Before stepping through the doorway, I paused, leaning down until my voice barely grazed the ear of the sulking young girl. With a tender, conspiratorial grin, I whispered that no matter what fabric or style she chose to wear, she would always look breathtakingly beautiful in my eyes, leaving her frozen in place with wide eyes and a face glowing as red as a ripe tomato. Offering a bright parting wave over my shoulder, I closed the door behind me and joined the Count, who stood waiting in the corridor with arms crossed and a knowing, amused smirk tugging at the corners of his lips, leading me deep into his vast private study, a grand sanctuary filled with towering mahogany shelves and vibrant greenery. The master of the house formally delivered the verdict that my application for permanent employment had been officially approved. Handing me a neatly pressed package of dark garments, I bowed with absolute gratitude as he confirmed that starting next week, I would no longer be a temporary guest, but a fully recognized resident attendant of House Ashford. Gripping the crisp fabric in my hands, I stood at attention while the Count watched me with quiet concern, asking if an orphan my age was genuinely prepared to shoulder the crushing weight of high society service. Standing firm on the polished wood floor, I calmly explained that living on the estate eliminated the daily journey entirely, providing me with an honorable purpose, a secure roof over my head, and a stable foundation for the future. Looking straight into his piercing gaze with crystal clarity, I swore an unspoken truth, that I possessed not a single shred of desire to exploit his noble prestige or political power for personal gain. The Count stroked his beard in quiet fascination, visibly shaken by the terrifying level of composure, sharp intellect, and unwavering integrity, radiating from a mere 7-year-old child. A playful grin tugged at my mouth as I teasingly pointed out that he must have sensed that exact maturity when he handpicked me out of the dirt to stand by his daughter's side. A warm, approving laugh escaped his chest at my sharp intuition, and as I promised to execute my duties with absolute perfection, I excused myself to finalize the single most important preparation for my new life. A short while later, walking down the hall toward her private chambers, the sheer density of her impatient, boiling irritation could practically be felt, vibrating straight through the thick oak door. I offered a crisp, rhythmic knock and formally announced my arrival, while on the other side of the wood, a very annoyed little lady sat scowling on her mattress, bitterly grumbling that talking business with her father was clearly far more exciting than keeping her company. The door glided open, and I stepped across the threshold impeccably fitted into my brand-new attendant uniform, complete with a crisp vest and neatly tied collar, bowing low with a practiced apology for keeping my lady waiting. Dropping smoothly onto one knee before the stunned, wide-eyed girl, I gently took her delicate hand into mine, declaring with absolute conviction that from this moment forward, my life and service belonged entirely to her. 3 peaceful years melted away like morning mist, carrying both of us to the threshold of our 10th year. Standing composed at my post in full formal attire, I watched over a visibly matured young lady sitting with absolute poise in a lavish banquet gown and long evening gloves. The quiet estate had transformed into a grand, bustling spectacle, its towering Gothic arches and glittering crystal chandeliers lavishly adorned from floor to ceiling in honor of the young heiress's milestone 10th birthday. Amidst the frantic, chaotic rush of final preparations, the headmaid came sprinting down the crowded servant corridor, balancing a loaded silver tray of crystal flutes, sweating in pure panic, as devastating news spread that the estate had run critically short on glassware for the incoming wave of high-ranking nobility. Behind the grand hall, the estate was practically on fire with chaotic energy. Nora dashed down the servant corridors balancing a towering silver platter of crystal flutes, beads of cold sweat running down her face as panic spread that The glassware would run out before the aristocratic guests even finished arriving. Snapping out rapid-fire orders with terrifying efficiency, she directed the remaining staff to lock down the banquet layout while sending an urgent dispatch to the cellars to adjust the evening wine pairings. Tucked away in a quiet back office far from the madness, I was running on pure fumes, slumping face first against the oak desk with an agonizing groan under the suffocating weight of event planning. Staring blankly at the wood grain, I couldn't help but marvel at how fast time had slipped away. 3 whole years had vanished since I first took up service in the estate, bringing both the young heiress and myself to the cusp of our 10th birthdays. In this ruthless high society, turning 10 was an irreplaceable milestone, a reality that turned the entire estate into a dazzling spectacle of ceremonial banners, cascading flowers, and heavy velvet drapery fit for royalty. Buried behind stacks of thick ledgers and endless seating charts, I glanced up. As the head maid stepped into the room to confirm the main hall was finally set, while I confessed to the knot of pure anxiety tightening in my chest over attending my very first aristocratic gala. Leaning back to stretch my stiff, aching shoulders, I remarked that the eve of any grand event was always pure madness, earning an exhausted yet grateful smile from the head maid for keeping the chaos under control. She clapped her hands with genuine excitement, heaping relentless praise on me for orchestrating every tiny detail of the upcoming festivities, while I could only offer an embarrassed grin from behind my towering paperwork. Looking down at the clipboard in my hands alongside veteran adult servants, the sheer absurdity of the situation hit me. Somehow, an entire estate of grown adults was looking up to a 10-year-old boy for logistical command. During the absolute peak of the frenzy, senior maids had been sprinting to my desk every 5 minutes, with armfuls of schedules and linen lists, desperately, relying on my snap judgments to fix every unexpected crisis. A wry smirk pulled at my lips as I realized that simply applying basic common-sense organizational systems from my past life had somehow turned an orphan into the de facto manager of a noble household. The head maid looked at me with open admiration, commending not only my sharp solutions, but the fact that I never hesitated to roll up my sleeves and bleed, alongside the rest of the staff on the floor. A fierce protective fire ignited in my chest as I envisioned the young heiress, smiling brightly tomorrow, knowing in my soul that every single drop of sweat was poured out just to make her milestone celebration unforgettable. Riding that surge of resolve, I raised my palm and concentrated my mana, forging a solid stone practice sword right out of thin air. A little mental exhaustion wasn't about to break my daily discipline. Swapping quickly into loose workout clothes, I slung the heavy stone blade over my shoulder, casually tossing a farewell to a thoroughly bewildered maid as I headed out into the cool night air. Pressing a glowing hand over my chest before stepping onto the grass, I activated a quick restoration spell, letting a soothing wave of warm magic completely dissolve the crushing fatigue in my muscles. Fully restored, I flashed a confident grin back at the dumbfounded woman, shouting that we would give tomorrow's celebration everything we had before, disappearing into the gardens. Much later beneath the moonlit sky, I planted the heavy stone sword into the dirt, wiping the sweat from my eyes and catching my breath in the tranquil courtyard when a familiar voice broke the silence. Stepping gracefully out from the dark shadows of the rose bushes, the young heiress revealed herself, her long raven hair shimmering in the moonlight with a knowing smirk playing on her lips as she admitted she had been watching me train the entire time. Flustered heat rushed to my face as I quickly offered a respectful bow, immediately scolding her for wandering into the freezing night air without so much as a cloak to keep her warm. Stepping into my personal space with a mischievous glint in her dark eyes, she looked up and playfully challenged me, asking why I didn't simply step forward and warm her up myself. A nervous sweat broke out on my neck as I silently recalled that she possessed enough destructive fire magic to incinerate the whole garden, yet I couldn't completely suppress the flutter in my chest from her bold affection. Walking side by side beneath a breathtaking sea of stars, her playful mood soured into a sharp, sulking pout, complaining that my endless banquet duties had kept me from visiting her private chambers for days. Turning to me with rising indignation, she pointed a delicate finger at my chest, passionately declaring that as her personal attendant, my rightful place was by her side, not buried in paperwork away from her. Raising my dirt-stained hands with an apologetic grin, I gently tried to explain that while spending every waking second with her was my dream, The insane preparation schedule had left me completely trapped. Softening my tone, I looked directly into her eyes, tenderly confessing that every single hour of exhausting labor was done for one reason only: to ensure her 10th birthday was the most magical day of her life. Her stubborn anger crumbled in an instant, her cheeks flushing bright crimson as she turned her head away, reluctantly muttering that she supposed she could. Forgive my absence just this once for the sake of tomorrow. Coming to an abrupt halt on the chilled cobblestone path, she stared at the ground before looking up with a vulnerable, hesitant gaze, quietly asking if I ever felt suffocatingly lonely living in this vast mansion so far away from where I started. Meeting her fragile question with a bright, unhesitating smile, I assured her that loneliness never crossed my mind, simply because her father and the entire household had embraced me like real family. Instead of bringing her comfort, a dark, brooding scowl instantly swept across her face. Spinning sharply on her heel, she stomped down the path, bitterly, barking at me to handle tomorrow properly while leaving me staring in utter confusion at what I could have possibly said wrong. A sudden, sharp sneeze shattered her dramatic exit, and moving on pure instinct, I wove a gentle vortex of warm, magical air around her trembling frame, wrapping the shivering young lady in a protective barrier against the biting night chill. Following close behind her, a sudden violent sneeze ripped through the quiet air, unleashing an accidental gust of wind that slammed directly into my chest. Raising my arms in pure shock, I blinked through the sudden gale, while she spun away in mortified silence, her ears glowing bright crimson from absolute embarrassment. By the next morning, the grand ballroom had transformed into an opulent wonderland. Cascades of golden sunlight poured through towering arched windows, illuminating crystal chandeliers, lush ceremonial garlands, and heavy velvet banners draped in honor of the territory's young heiress. Standing proudly on the mezzanine balcony, Count Gerald addressed the sea of gathered aristocrats, projecting his booming voice across the crowd as he welcomed them to his daughter's milestone. But as I stood at attention right behind him in my formal attire, the Count abruptly turned around, his warm, benevolent public mask instantly warping into a terrifying, bone-chilling glare, aimed squarely at me. Without uttering a single syllable, his murderous eyes delivered an undeniable ultimatum. If a single opportunistic pest or slimy aristocrat dared breathe near his precious daughter today, it was my job to erase them on the spot. A cold bead of sweat slid down my neck as I gave a silent, obedient nod. Casting my eyes downward to scan the shifting sea of nobility below, two distinct figures standing near the perimeter immediately caught my attention. My heart skipped a beat as the lore of this world clicked into place. They were the Caldwell brothers, Rainer and Cassian. But before I could even process their sudden appearance, one of them snapped his head straight toward the balcony, forcing me to jerk back behind the marble railing to avoid giving away my surveillance. Drawing a slow, measured breath, I peered back over the edge only to find the corner completely abandoned. The two brothers had melted seamlessly into the crowd without leaving a trace, leaving a knot of paranoia twisting in my gut. A sudden reverent hush swept across the ballroom as the master of ceremonies announced the guest of honor. Stepping into the light amidst a gentle cascade of falling petals, she looked breathtaking, draped in an exquisite dark ceremonial gown with delicate lace gloves, commanding the room with a poised elegance that left every young noble completely spellbound. Watching from the upper landing, I stood frozen in place as she was escorted. Through the reception floor, the ambient glow of the chandeliers highlighting just how gracefully she had grown over the years. The moment her dark eyes drifted upward and caught mine, her icy aristocratic mask completely shattered, replaced by a radiant, bashful smile meant exclusively for me, prompting an involuntary tender grin and a subtle warmth across my cheeks. Guided along the marble floor, she passed through the admiring crowd as an aria. Singer's voice resonated through the grand hall, wrapping the entire room in pure, mesmerizing grandeur. Standing above it all, I closed my eyes for a brief second, overcome by a quiet, profound awe at how far the broken, isolated girl from 3 years ago had truly come. Yet the reality of my role pulled me right back to earth. I was here to oversee the security and flow of this entire operation. Swallowing a small pang of regret, that duty kept me anchored to the balcony instead of walking at her side. Right on cue, a sudden frantic whisper hissed from the shadows of a nearby pillar. revealing Nora gesturing desperately for me to abandon my post and follow her. Hurrying down the corridor, I questioned why she had left our young mistress unattended, but the head maid merely offered an anxious, fumbling chuckle, desperately trying to skirt around a sudden, radical shift in the seating arrangements. Before my brain could even register what was happening, I was shoved into an ornate, high-backed ceremonial chair placed directly beside the young heiress at the primary head table, sending an immediate surge of blind panic down my spine. Glancing sideways, she gently teased how pale and terrified I looked, while I desperately scanned the room, feeling the suffocating weight of dozens of high-ranking nobles staring in sheer disgust at a servant boy occupying the highest seat of privilege. Leaning in with a desperate whisper, I asked whose brilliant idea it was to engineer my public execution, only for her to cross her arms, puff out her cheeks, and turn away with an adorable, stubborn pout. I quietly hissed that a lowborn attendant had no business sitting in a throne, reserved for high nobility, but she instantly snapped back, complaining that my endless security duties had kept me away from her the entire day. When I tried to lecture her on the unforgiving rules of high society etiquette, she cut me off entirely, passionately declaring with burning conviction that I would never be just an ordinary servant to her. Her fiery defiance softened in an instant, her face flushing with fragile, hesitant vulnerability as she looked me straight in the eyes, softly confessing that she had forced this arrangement because she believed my birthday deserved to be honored with the exact same grandeur as hers. My breath caught in my throat as she quietly added that since no one in this world had ever celebrated my existence, she wanted nothing more than to share her most important day with me. In that singular moment, the memory of Nora casually probing about my age days ago clicked together, making me realize that she had remembered the painful truth, that an orphan had neither a recorded birth date nor anyone to celebrate it. A profound, overwhelming warmth bloomed in my chest, realizing with breathtaking clarity that her defiance wasn't born of childish arrogance, but of a pure, selfless desire to elevate me as her equal before the entire world. Looking at the radiant warmth in her eyes, a massive weight lifted from my soul, giving me absolute, undeniable proof that the cruel, unhinged villainess of the original tragedy was officially dead and gone. Placing a hand over my racing heart, I offered her a soft, deeply emotional smile, expressing my deepest gratitude and swearing that simply being recognized by her brought me more joy than any grand celebration ever could. Completely undone by the raw sincerity in my voice, her cheeks turned a violent, burning crimson, stammering through her fluster as she shyly asked if we could sneak away to be alone together once the formal banquet finally wrapped up. Watching her bashful reaction, my resolve hardened into steel, silently swearing to protect this fragile happiness and ensure this night remained utterly flawless for her sake. Yet the lingering shadow of the Caldwell brothers' sudden disappearance gnawed at the back of my mind, desperately praying that nothing would shatter this hard-won peace, completely oblivious to the venomous, calculating gaze already locked onto our table from the sea of guests. That fleeting paradise shattered in a fraction of a second when an arrogant figure suddenly lunged toward her, forcing my body to move on pure reflex, my fingers clamping like a vice around the intruder's reaching wrist, locking eyes with the threat as suffocating tension exploded across the grand hall. Trapped in the seat of honor right beside her, a cold sweat broke across my brow as she cheerfully lifted a delicate pastry to my lips, leaving me utterly mortified to be pampered like royalty in full view of the territory's elite. Humming with pure delight, she continued trying to feed me more delicacies, completely unfazed by the dozens of highborn guests glaring up at us in venomous disbelief, until a sharp, insolent voice cut through the ambient music like a knife. Sauntering toward our table with a smug, mocking sneer, an arrogant young noble gave a theatrical, mocking bow before demanding that the young heiress grant him the next dance. One look at his sharp features confirmed he was the very boy I had clocked on the ballroom floor earlier. A sudden surge of past life memories flashed behind my eyes, instantly matching his aristocratic face to the character archives of the Otome game. He was Rainer Caldwell, the notoriously violent, short-tempered heir of the Caldwell Viscounty, looking far younger than the hot-headed teenager destined to make waves in the original narrative. In that future story, he was infamous for his explosive temper and bloody brawls. Yet his blind, obsessive devotion to the heroine made him a massive favorite among players. a sharp, disgusting contrast to the utter cruelty he showed toward background commoners. Completely ignoring the basic rules of noble decorum, the boy took an aggressive step onto the dais, with arms spread wide, loudly barking that she should drop her haughty attitude and take his hand immediately. She didn't even flinch, fixing him with a stare of freezing aristocratic disgust and shutting him down with a cold, absolute refusal that left the spoiled brat trembling in stunned humiliation. Without missing a beat, she made it devastatingly clear that she had zero interest in being anywhere near him, casually turning her gaze toward me with a soft, affectionate warmth that showed the entire room exactly who held her heart. Suffering such a brutal public rejection before high society completely snapped, the boy's fragile ego, lunging forward with a wild, reckless swing, aimed straight for our table. Before his knuckles could graze her, my body moved on pure instinct, my fingers locking around his wrist like an iron clamp mid-air, driving a lethal, piercing glare straight into his eyes that stopped him dead in his tracks. Snarling in fury, the brat barked at a filthy servant to know his place, but I stood immovable, calmly introducing myself as her dedicated personal attendant. I tightened my grip until the bones of his wrist began to grind together, forcing a whimper of pain from his lips as I coldly reminded him that my absolute duty was to protect my lady, and I would break anyone who threatened her. Keeping my voice flat and commanding, I instructed him to stand down immediately, warning that throwing a violent tantrum in the middle of a high society banquet would drag the entire Caldwell name through the mud. I laid out the brutal political reality. A Viscount's son laying hands on a high-ranking count's daughter or her household would trigger an unforgivable territorial scandal, sending beads of cold terror dripping down his pale face. Seeing the sullen fear finally crack his arrogance, I recognized that he possessed just enough noble survival instinct to realize his mistake, offering him a quiet out by promising to keep this disgrace from the Count if he turned around and walked away. The boy grumbled a bitter compliance, prompting me to exhale a quiet breath of relief as I released my grip, completely blind to the venomous, treacherous smirk spreading across his face. Taking full advantage of my lowered guard, he whipped his arm back and drove an underhanded, coward strike straight into my jaw with a sickening crack. As he shrieked about his trampled noble pride and cocked his fist for a second blow, I swallowed the sharp sting, instantly weaving a concentrated slumber spell directly into his core. The magic detonated beneath his skin, his pupils instantly rolling back as the violent rage vanished from his face, collapsing completely limp against my chest. Supporting the unconscious boy's dead weight, I barked an urgent command to the headmaid, ordering her to summon both his father and the master of the estate, to handle the disgrace through formal channels, sending her sprinting off in sheer panic. Shoving the limp noble into the hands of approaching guards, I turned to find the young heiress rushing toward me in absolute horror, calling my name with raw panic in her eyes as I immediately pushed past the throbbing ache in my face to ask if she was hurt. Brushing away my concern, her trembling gloved fingers reached up to tenderly cradle my bruised cheek, her voice cracking as she begged me to stop worrying about her and look at what he had done to me. Watching tears spill from her dark eyes as she traced the swelling, I offered her a calm, tender smile, channeling a silent pulse of healing mana to soothe the bruised flesh and prove that the cowardly blow was nothing. Looking up into my eyes with breathtaking vulnerability, she whispered just how terrifyingly close she felt to losing her mind with worry, our unspoken bond tightening in the middle of the chaotic hall. Clasping her hands over her racing heart, she looked at me with profound, lingering affection, while medical staff and servants finally scrambled down the steps with restorative elixirs. The frantic atmosphere froze solid when another figure rushed forward, his older brother dropping violently onto his hands and knees, slamming his forehead against the carpet in an extreme, humiliating dojeza to beg forgiveness for his family's unforgivable shame. My jaw nearly dropped to the floor, waving my hands in sheer flustered disbelief that an elite noble heir would prostrate himself like a dog before a common servant over a banquet brawl. I desperately urged the boy to lift his head, instantly recognizing his striking features as the primary capture target and absolute male lead of the entire original story. Looking down at the trembling boy, I remembered his legendary status from my past life, the quintessential honorable gentle prince archetype who had completely dominated every single popularity poll in the game. Looking at the boy kneeling before me, the pieces of my past life memories click together, confirming him as the quintessential gentle prince whose upright, noble heart had consistently made him the undisputed favorite among all romantic suitors. Watching him bow his head in agonizing contrition, offering desperate apology. After apology for his brother's unforgivable scandal, a heavy wave of sympathy washed over me, realizing the sheer misery of having to constantly clean up after such a reckless disaster of a sibling. Retreating into a quiet private drawing room, the knocked-out troublemaker lay, dead to the world across the sofa, while his older brother sat across from me, with slumped shoulders bitterly lamenting how years of rotten pampering had convinced the brat that the entire world existed solely to bow to his every whim. I listened in dry, weary silence, internally noting that the kid acted like an entitled elementary schooler throwing a tantrum, though looking at his 10-year-old frame, that was literally what he was. Glancing at the boy snoring peacefully on the velvet cushions, the political reality began to set in, prompting me to quietly ask what kind of fate awaited the young menace once the Count stepped into the room. His brother's expression hardened into a grim, suffocating shadow, explaining that while the master of the estate had final say, absolute exile from high society was the bare minimum sentence for a direct assault on the ruling Count's household. I cleared my throat, forcing a calm expression while my mind reeled, utterly stunned to watch the brutal fantasy trope of political banishment play out in real time right before my eyes. Looking back at the sleeping boy, the terrifying weight of this aristocratic world sank in. Even at 10 years old, noble heirs were held to ruthless adult accountability for their crimes, making me wonder if the little monster was honestly better off never waking up to face the execution of his social status. The deeper political fallout sent a jolt through my chest. Having the boy cast out into exile officially shattered his entire romantic route from the original game, proving that the predetermined script of this universe was actively coming apart at the seams. Watching the established storyline splinter into pieces filled me with a surge of raw hope, solidifying my conviction that the young heiress's doomed descent into villainy could also be completely torn to shreds and rewritten. Stepping back into the grand corridor, a dark ceremonial gown fluttered into view as she came sprinting toward me, her voice trembling with frantic panic as she called my name and demanded to know if I was truly unharmed after being gone for so long. I met her worried gaze with a warm, reassuring smile, putting her racing heart at ease by explaining that the other family had simply taken the necessary time to deliver their formal apologies before the noble witnesses. A long, trembling breath escaped her lips, the suffocating dread melting off her face, the instant she confirmed with her own eyes that I was standing in one piece. That relief instantly ignited into pure, venomous fury as she scolded me for daring to sound guilty, fiercely arguing that the entire disaster was the fault of that arrogant little barbarian who dared run wild in her home. Lowering my eyes, a pang of self-reproach tightened in my chest, genuinely hating that my own lack of vigilance had allowed a street brawl to stain what should have been her most magical night. I cursed myself inwardly, wishing I had personally combed through every single name on the guest registry to ensure that entitled brat was barred from ever setting foot on the property. Before I could sink deeper into the spiral of guilt, she closed the distance, gently pressing both of her gloved hands against my cheeks and forcing my startled eyes to lock straight into hers. Looking deep into my soul with raw, unfiltered emotion, she whispered that as long as I was breathing beside her, she didn't give a damn about the banquet, the guests, or anything else in the entire world. The sheer boldness of her own confession hit her like a tidal wave. She spun around in a panic, twirling a strand of dark hair between her fingers as a burning crimson blush engulfed her face, desperately stammering that the night wasn't ruined at all. Peeking back over her shoulder with an endearing, shy vulnerability, she softly asked if I would slip away from the noisy banquet and step into the courtyard, gardens with her. For a split second, a chilling phantom of my early memories flashed, a vision of her younger self surrounded by swirling, suffocating tendrils of destructive, dark mana, before the haunting image vanished back into the peaceful present. Walking side by side into the quiet, moonlit courtyard away from the deafening roar of the estate, I casually asked if she had managed to share a dance with any of the young aristocrats during the festivities. Her cheeks flushed a delicate pink beneath the moonlight, looking away as she admitted that she had coldly rejected every single noble suitor who approached her throughout the entire evening. I turned the thought over in my head, knowing that in high society, the formal ballroom dance was the vital centerpiece where noble families forged alliances and secured future prospects. Looking at her in genuine confusion, I wondered why on earth she would willingly cast aside such an essential noble tradition and shut out every young lord in the room. Her face burned an even deeper shade of crimson, nervously twirling her hair as she finally let the truth slip from her lips. She had refused them all because she was saving her very first dance for me. Staring at the garden stones with breathtaking shyness, she confessed that she had spent all of yesterday trying to ask me, but her courage had failed her every single time. My eyes widened as the realization hit me like a physical blow, the puzzle pieces of her strange, flustered attitude from the previous night finally locking into place. Pressing a hand over my chest with humble hesitation, I asked if she was truly willing to dance with a lowborn servant who didn't even know the first step of formal etiquette, only for her to offer a radiant giggle, admitting that she was completely terrible at dancing anyway. Spreading her arms wide with an overjoyed luminous smile beneath the endless canopy of shimmering stars, she declared that out here in the secluded night, far away from the judging eyes of high society, we could share our first dance in perfect peace. Standing beneath the vast starlit canopy of the secluded garden, she spread her arms wide with a breathtaking radiant smile, softly whispering that out here, far beyond the prying eyes of the ballroom, not even the moon was judging us. Resting her hands on her hips with a playful gleam in her eyes, she teased that even if I stumbled and stepped on her feet, she would be the only witness in the world, instantly melting the lingering knot of tension in my chest as I laughed, admitting there was nothing left to fear. Her teasing demeanor softened into pure aristocratic grace as she reached out a single-gloved hand, gently asking if I would grant her the honor of the first dance, to which I bowed with deep reverence, whispering that the honor was entirely mine. Beneath the glittering sea of constellations, our fingers intertwined as we stepped together into the night, sharing our very first dance in the secluded courtyard as an unspoken, unbreakable bond quietly took root between us. The magical calm was shattered the moment we stepped back into the estate, where a clamoring horde of visiting aristocrats instantly mobbed me, aggressively trying to poach me from the household with absurd, blank check offers that left me staring in utter, deadpan disbelief. The nobles showered me with relentless praise, marveling at how a mere servant had neutralized an arrogant heir in a heartbeat, practically throwing bags of gold at my feet as they fought to outbid each other for my services on the spot. A nervous sweat broke out across my neck as I raised my hands to keep the desperate aristocrats at bay, realizing with dry amusement that defending my young mistress had inadvertently served as a primetime showcase of my abilities to high society. Maintaining my formal posture, I offered a calm, polite refusal to their extravagant promises, letting my eyes drift warmly across the ballroom toward the one person who truly held my loyalty. With an unshakable pride in my voice, I firmly shut down every single noble in the room, proudly declaring that I was her dedicated attendant and that I had zero intention of ever serving another soul for the rest of my days. Catching every word of my unwavering vow from across the floor, her cheeks flushed a deep, luminous crimson, her heart visibly soaring with overwhelming warmth and joy. The long, chaotic milestone banquet finally dwindled to a quiet close, leaving the sprawling hall wrapped in heavy silence as scattered ribbons, half-empty, flutes, and abandoned tables waited for the night shift. I trudged down the dimly lit corridor under the crushing weight of freshly gathered banquet linens, wearily acknowledging that pulling off a high society spectacle meant drowning in just as much grueling cleanup as it did preparation. Pausing beside the arched windows to wipe the exhaustion from my forehead, I let out a heavy sigh, praying the next event wouldn't run the entire household staff straight into the middle of the night. Out of nowhere, the head maid appeared with boundless energy, throwing her hands up in triumphant victory to announce that the entire grand hall had already been cleared and reset from top to bottom. I stared at her in sheer, wide-eyed disbelief, prompting her to explain with a proud grin that the entire servant staff had worked like demons, completely inspired by my relentless dedication throughout the day. A bashful heat rushed to my face as I rubbed the back of my neck, deeply humbled by their respect and immensely relieved that the nightmare cleanup had ended, hours ahead of schedule. She offered a tender, knowing smile, softly remarking that seeing our young mistress look so radiantly happy made every single second of exhaustion worth it, a truth I agreed with from the bottom of my heart. Helping her pack the final crates of silver along the quiet hallway, she remarked with a warm, nostalgic gaze that seeing the two of us together reminded her of the modest party she had once thrown for her own childhood companion years ago. Her voice drifted with fond nostalgia as she recalled how both she and her friend were penniless orphans with nothing to their names, yet she had poured her entire soul into making that one day special, seeing that very same protective devotion burning inside of me. She nudged me with a teasing, cheerful grin, playfully asking if I didn't think. The young heiress and I had grown into the absolute picture of inseparable childhood friends. The words childhood friends violently struck a dissonant nerve in my chest, draining the warmth from my face as a chilling realization sank into my gut. As she cheerfully stacked the final storage crates, I stood rooted to the floor. In cold contemplation, the sickening feeling gnawing at me that something fundamental about the fabric of this reality was completely distorted. My mind frantically tore through every recorded piece of lore from the original game, desperately searching for any mention of the infamous Villainess ever possessing a childhood friend in the canon storyline. A horrific memory of the original timeline flashed behind my eyes. The vision of a broken, isolated girl drowning in the suffocating abyss of void magic, leaving me with a terrifying dread that my reincarnation had altered the timeline in ways I couldn't even begin to comprehend. Noticing my sudden, vacant silence, the head maid gently called out my name, instantly shattering the suffocating fog of my anxiety. Forcing a quick smile, I laughed off the tension, blaming my blank stare on simple physical exhaustion just as another servant urgently called her away to inspect the final pantry counts. Watching her rally the remaining staff with bright enthusiasm for the final evening rounds, I swallowed my rising unease, stifling a heavy yawn as I turned to finish my remaining duties before collapsing into sleep. Watching the head maid rally the remaining servants with boundless enthusiasm, my eyelids felt like lead, dragging myself through the quiet halls while reminding my sleep-deprived brain that one final crucial duty remained before I could collapse. The fog in my mind cleared in an instant of sheer panic as I realized I had accidentally dozed off, and that I was supposed to report directly to my ladies' private quarters the second the hall was cleared, sending me sprinting down the dimly lit corridors as fast as my legs could carry me. A suffocating chill crept down my spine, terrified to my core that keeping the young heiress waiting on the night of her milestone birthday would earn me the absolute silent treatment for an entire week. Skidding to a halt outside her towering double doors, a strange, metallic snap echoed from inside the room, freezing me in the arched hallway as I wondered if exhaustion was finally making me hallucinate. Raising my gloved hand, I offered a soft, respectful knock against the dark wood, clearing my throat to announce my arrival and immediately apologizing for the inexcusable delay. The hallway fell dead silent, leading me to believe she had already collapsed from exhaustion, turning on my heel to let her sleep until the heavy door groaned, slowly unlatching and creaking open all on its own. Before I could even take a breath, an explosion of writhing, pitch-black magical force detonated from the threshold, slamming violently into my chest and hurling me backwards through the air in absolute shock. I crashed hard against the polished floorboards, my vision spinning as jagged, living shadows slithered across the carpet like black roots, hissing with raw, volatile malice. Slumped against the hallway wall and gasping for air, the throbbing pain in my ribs was instantly overshadowed by a surge of pure dread for the girl inside that room, struggling to force my trembling arms to lift my weight against the crushing atmospheric pressure. Dense pillars of black mist billowed through the open doorway, like smoke from an inferno. Stepping through the darkness, she appeared like a ghost in her simple white nightgown, her long dark hair whipping through the swirling vortex of shadows as she looked down at me with cold, hollow eyes while I weakly choked out her name. Standing motionless beneath the doorframe, she was completely swallowed by an ominous, supernatural abyss, looking terrifyingly detached from humanity while I stared up at her in breathless silence. The violent miasma raged around her small frame, painting the exact, horrific portrait of dark arcana that the legends warned of, yet looking at her, my resolve never wavered, determined to stand my ground no matter what monstrous power she unleashed. In a fraction of a second, the terrifying atmosphere evaporated into thin air. She dropped the supernatural aura, crossing her arms with an annoyed deadpan pout as she sharply scolded me for taking an eternity to get there. Pulling me inside the safety of her warm room, the mood did a complete turn as she cheerfully fastened a napkin around my collar, proudly revealing a lavish spread of gourmet cakes, tarts, and freshly baked pastries she had personally set aside because she knew I had worked all day without a single meal. Sitting at the table staring at the mountain of sweets, I hesitated, weakly pointing out that the head maid would skin me alive if she caught me gorging on sugar at midnight, prompting a mischievous grin from my mistress as she happily declared us partners in crime. Leaning in dangerously close with sparkling affectionate eyes, she held a delicate cookie straight to my lips with an expectant smile, leaving me blushing furiously as I wondered how my evening had devolved into being spoon-fed by my own noble employer. Gently reaching up to take the pastry from her fingers to stop the embarrassing pampering, she instantly flushed bright crimson, stubbornly pouting that the clock hadn't struck midnight, meaning it was still officially her birthday. Swallowing the bite, I let the playful mood settle, fixing her with a calm, serious gaze as I quietly asked about the terrifying black shadow magic that had nearly blown me down the hall moments ago. Her bright smile died instantly, replaced by a suffocating, somber silence. She softly asked me to pour her some tea, but the moment she lifted her trembling hand, an uncontrolled spike of black darkness violently lashed out, making me flinch in alarm. Retreating toward the grand window, she clutched her arms tightly against her chest as thick serpent-like tendrils of shadow crawled across the wooden furniture, plunging the lavish bedroom into a freezing, unnatural twilight. Turning back with eyes drowning in sorrow, she confessed in a breaking whisper that this terrifying darkness was her arcana, the absolute unique magical affinity granted to every soul in this world. My thoughts raced in pure panic, remembering the fundamental laws of this universe, where every person awakens a distinct power, urgently pressing her to tell me when this nightmare had first manifested. A horrific memory from the original game lore flashed violently behind my eyes. The apocalyptic vision of an older Aurelia consumed by this exact black mist, drowning entire kingdoms in ruin as the final villainess. Snapping out of her trance, she desperately reined the shadows back into her skin, looking away with a shudder of pure guilt as she softly apologized for terrifying me with such a repulsive, unnatural curse. Staring at the floor in utter shame, she revealed that the dark miasma had first violently erupted in her sleep a month ago, leaving me utterly devastated that she had carried this agonizing terror entirely alone in the dark. Her fingers dug desperately into her nightgown as hot tears began tracking down her cheeks, weeping that the only reason she had hidden the truth was because she was paralyzed by the thought that I would look at her with disgust and abandon her forever. Feeling the freezing, suffocating weight of the room, the tragic puzzle pieces fell into place. This terrifying, uncontrollable darkness was the exact reason high society had branded her an accursed monster, pushing her into the deep end of villainy. Desperate to prove she wasn't a threat, she forced a strained, heartbreaking smile, trying to show off how the shadows could gently lift a small teacup across the table, yet the trembling vulnerability in her eyes laid her broken heart bare. Watching her drown in the suffocating terror of her own isolation was more than I could bear. Stepping forward in an instant, I wrapped my arms around her, trembling frame, pulling her into a fierce, protective embrace as a soft gasp caught in her throat against my shoulder. As tendrils of dark, suffocating magic begin to seep from her body, I do not recoil. Instead, I close the distance between us, firmly gripping her trembling hands in mine. She stiffens, wide-eyed and shaken, utterly bewildered that anyone would dare reach straight through the very power she despises rather than fleeing in absolute terror. Staring into her eyes, I can see the agonizing ghosts of her past clawing their way to the surface. She was once nothing more than an innocent child, abandoned in the venomous waters of high society, enduring the cold, contemptuous glares and sickening whispers of nobles who treated her like an abomination. Crushed beneath the weight of that suffocating isolation, she had spent countless nights completely alone, engulfed in a swirling black haze. Staring down at her own trembling hands, she had quietly surrendered to the bitter belief that her very existence was an unforgivable curse. Back in the quiet stillness of our moonlit room, She sits beside me on the sofa, stripped of all defenses. Her voice breaks as she confesses that no matter how desperately she tries to bury this dark power, it continues to fester within her, haunted by the paralyzing dread that one day, I too will walk away and leave her behind just like everyone else. A sharp, suffocating ache grips my chest as she lowers her gaze, whispering the painful truth. The only person who had ever sworn never to abandon her was her own mother. The very woman who vanished without a trace, leaving behind a hollow ruin of shattered trust and unresolved grief. The revelation hits me like a sudden blow. Sifting through every memory of the original game and my years in this estate, she had never spoken a single word about her mother. In the lore I knew, the woman was nothing more than a ghost, entirely absent from the records. She remembers a time when her mother's embrace was her only sanctuary in a hostile world, the sole pair of arms willing to pull her close and offer warmth, when society recoiled from the dangerous power slumbering in her blood. Yet that fragile comfort was brutally ripped away the moment she turned 5. Without a word of warning, her mother packed her belongings, walked out the manor doors, and severed every tie, never to return. The sheer cold cruelty of that abandonment leaves me paralyzed in disbelief. Suddenly, the icy, guarded look she wore the first day we met makes horrifying sense. Beneath that detached and unyielding exterior, she was harboring a lifetime of bleeding wounds, quietly terrified of forming a bond only to be discarded all over again. Watching her sit under the soft glow of the room, I know I cannot erase the betrayal of a mother who abandoned her child. Yet deep within my soul, a fierce resolve takes root. I will tear down the walls around her heart and ensure she never has to face that freezing solitude again. Reaching out, I extend my hand toward her, determined to give her the unwavering stability and affection she has been starved of for far too long. Calling out her name, I close my fingers tightly around hers, stepping forward with an absolute conviction to shatter the darkness threatening to consume her. Looking directly into her glistening eyes by the tall manor window, I tell her with unwavering certainty that being reviled and feared is not the destiny written for her. I speak from the depths of my heart, reminding her that while ignorant people will always recoil from power they cannot comprehend, their cruelty does not mean she is unworthy of love. The words strike her deeply, leaving her staring back at me in stunned silence. Feeling an unbidden warmth rise to my cheeks, I lower my gaze and swear a solemn, heartfelt oath, promising that no matter what trials await us, I will stand by her side and never let go of her hand. A sudden, suffocating silence descends upon the room. A drop of cold sweat traces down my neck as panic starts to kick in, my mind racing with the agonizing fear that my dramatic pledge sounded far too intense, awkward, or blatantly embarrassing. But the heavy tension instantly shatters as a soft, breathless laugh escapes her lips. The lingering despair melts away, replaced by an expression so genuinely radiant it takes my breath away. Wiping away a stray tear with a faint, blushing smile, she confesses in a tender whisper that my promise was the exact lifeline her wounded heart had been desperate to hear for years. Relief washes over me like a wave, resting my palm gently against her cheek with a warm, reassuring smile. I tell her that I will repeat those exact words every single day until she truly believes them. In the quiet sanctuary of the room, I pull her close into a protective embrace, cementing my silent vow to guard her against every cruelty this world throws our way and carve out the happiness she deserves. Yet, as I hold her against my chest, playing the role of her steadfast protector and dearest companion, a sharp, icy chill suddenly seizes my mind. Sinister questions begin unspooling in my thoughts as I recall the original lore of the game. What truly broke her? Could the shallow prejudice of the nobility really have been enough to transform this vulnerable, gentle girl into a ruthless harbinger of destruction? As I piece her raw vulnerability together with the game's brutal storyline, the horrifying puzzle clicks into place with devastating clarity. Looking up at me with an intensely fragile gaze, she whispers that if I were ever to vanish from her life, her entire world would crumble into utter ruin. The sheer weight of her words freezes the blood in my veins. She reaches up, her fingers lightly brushing my cheek as she confesses how terrifying the thought of my absence truly is, while I force out a strained, nervous laugh just to keep my composure from completely shattering. Beneath that fragile smile, a wave of sickening dread crashes over me as the forgotten details of the narrative violently rush back into my consciousness. A memory from my past life blazes through my mind. A lore entry detailing the tragic birth of the story's ultimate villain, an innocent girl pushed into madness and bloodlust following the brutal murder of her beloved childhood companion at the hands of a corrupt noble. The horrifying truth strikes with merciless force. I am that companion. I am the one destined to be slaughtered before my 15th year, and my inevitable death is the very catalyst that plunges her into darkness, forging her into a merciless monster. Snapping back to the eerie stillness of the room, I look down into her earnest, trusting eyes as she sits waiting for my answer, quietly asking once more if she can truly believe my promise to never leave her side. Bathed in the soft moonlight of her private quarters, she sits beside me on the sofa, looking into my eyes with an aching vulnerability as she quietly asks if she can truly stake her entire world on my promise never to abandon her. A radiant, captivating smile spreads across her face. Yet just beneath that gentle expression, subtle wisps of ominous darkness begin to writhe around her silhouette. Forcing a nervous nod, a cold wave of dread tightens in my gut, an unspoken instinct warning me that her shadow magic itself is watching, ready to exact a horrific toll should I ever break this vow. Under the blazing afternoon sun, I stand trembling on the estate's sparring grounds. My skin battered and bruised from hours of grueling, relentless combat. Every muscle in my body screams in agonizing protest, yet my white-knuckled grip refuses to release the wooden sword as I desperately beg my instructor for just one more round. Driven by the suffocating terror of our impending destruction, I grit my teeth and swing with everything I have left, slicing through the air with a desperate, silent oath to carve out enough strength to defy my fated execution. In the midst of the strain, a fleeting image of her drifts through my mind, a solitary figure lingering quietly among the garden blossoms, carrying an ethereal grace wrapped in an inescapable veil of sorrow. Snapping back to the harsh reality of the open courtyard, my lungs burn as heavy pants escape my lips. My focus locked onto my sparring partner while the harsh crack of wood colliding echoes off the stone grounds. Taking note of my ragged breathing and sheer physical exhaustion, Gareth lowers his guard and gently urges me to take a much-needed break. But my stubborn pride flares up, forcing out a lie that I am more than ready to keep fighting. Instead of answering, Gareth shoots an anxious glance toward the edge of the grounds, where she stands with crossed arms boring holes into him with an icy, terrifying glare that seems to turn 10 degrees colder every single time his strike sends me crashing into the dirt. Desperate to spare his own skin from her silently mounting fury, Gareth claps a hand onto my shoulder and hastily declares a recess, just as she steps forward to join us. The terrifying scowl vanishes instantly, replaced by a warm, playful smile, as she teases me for not acknowledging her sooner, adding that she purposely kept her distance so she wouldn't disrupt my training. When I ask how her morning etiquette lessons went, she proudly beams that her studies are already finished for the day, stepping boldly into my personal space with unrestrained affection. Framed by the blooming estate gardens, she tilts her head up to meet my eyes, coyly hinting that I am more than welcome to praise her for completing all her duties ahead of schedule. A genuine smile breaks through my fatigue as I rest my hand gently against her head, offering her the praise she craves while she closes her eyes, melting into the warmth of my touch with pure, uninhibited joy. But as my fingers brush through her hair, a suffocating realization crashes over me once again. In the game's original timeline, her descent into pure, unadulterated madness was ignited by one solitary tragedy: the gruesome death of the only childhood friend she ever cherished, me. A cruel, sickening irony settles in my chest. In my frantic effort to save her, the deep, unbreakable bond I built has only cemented the exact catalyst for her destruction. If I die now, her grief will be infinitely more catastrophic. A horrifying flash of the future sears itself into my mind, the image of this gentle girl completely hollowed out, consumed by a raging tempest of shadow, magic as the game's merciless final calamity, marching straight toward her own tragic demise. For a fleeting, desperate second, the thought crosses my mind to push her away, to make her despise me so that my death wouldn't break her. But looking down at her fragile, trusting face, I immediately crush the cowardly thought. Inflicting that cruelty on her is something I could never bear to do. Leaning even further into my touch, she rests her cheek comfortably against my palm, softly murmuring that I need to keep petting her properly and not stop. Watching that innocent smile, the sheer weight of what we share strikes me to my core. I don't just want to save her from afar. I desperately want to live. I want to survive and stand beside her, refusing to ever let death force me to abandon her. Lowering my hand to my chest, I harden my resolve. There is only one path. Forward. I have to survive, and I have to become strong enough to overpower whatever fate is coming for my throat, all while her inquisitive eyes remain fixed on me. Catching on to my sudden silence, she narrows her eyes slightly and points out that I've been acting strangely serious lately, catching me entirely off guard. As my thoughts scramble for a believable excuse, my mind frantically envisions the absurd disaster of actually telling her the truth, that I'm scheduled to be murdered soon, just as Gareth suddenly steps in and delivers a loud, heavy smack to my back, shattering the awkward silence. With a hearty laugh, Gareth announces to her that I'm simply killing myself with training, because I want to look heroic during the upcoming ritual of trials. In an instant, the air is sucked from my lungs and my heart violently freezes in place. As Gareth continues to laugh about how ridiculously obsessed I've become ever. Since turning 10 years old, she looks at me with wide, innocent curiosity, completely unaware that I am standing there paralyzed in pure, unadulterated horror. Blood draining from my face, I stammer out a frantic, incoherent excuse about pressing duties and stumble blindly away from the grounds, leaving her staring after me, with a brow furrowed in deep, troubled concern. I sprint recklessly through the sprawling, echoing hallways of the estate in a state of sheer panic, the horrifying truth pounding against my skull as I finally realize the sinister weight of the ritual of trials and the deadly execution waiting for me right around the corner. A wave of suffocating panic crashes over me, and I clutch my face in pure distress as the cold, brutal truth finally sets in. The upcoming ritual of trials, the mandatory forest expedition for every 10-year-old noble, is the exact execution ground where my fated death is meant to happen. Staring toward the pale morning light spilling across the room, my mind furiously calculates the odds. While the trial is strictly monitored under the illusion of guaranteed safety, any lethal ambush or catastrophic event would strike right in the chaos of this wilderness excursion. Standing before the heavy doors of my quarters, an unbearable tension knots tightly in my chest while I frantically scramble to piece together a foolproof strategy to survive what feels like an inevitable death sentence. Exhaling a long, weary breath, I push the heavy oak doors open with hardened resolve. No matter what cruel fate has written for me, I refuse to walk quietly into an early grave. Over the agonizing days that follow, I throw every ounce of my being into relentless preparation, splitting every waking hour between studying dense encyclopedias on magical beasts and enduring grueling combat training under the sun. Sweat stings my eyes and my muscles burn with exhaustion, but I grit my teeth and drive my blade through the air again and again, ruthlessly pushing my young body far past its natural limits. When night falls, I collapse into my study chair by the flickering candlelight, combing through detailed guides of every venomous predator and territorial monster lurking within the trial grounds. As twilight bleeds across the estate grounds, I lean back and reflect on the sheer desperation of my preparations. Yet an inescapable dread still gnaws at my soul, whispering that tomorrow might be the day my life is forcibly extinguished. Dropping my aching head onto the desk, I rub my temples in raw frustration, cursing the fact that my memories provide no concrete details about the exact weapon, monster, or assassin that ends my life. Looking out into the obsidian darkness of the window, I stare at my own reflection, haunted by a chilling question: just how horrific and agonizing was my original demise to completely shatter that sweet girl and push her into madness? When the fateful morning finally arrives, the two of us step together beneath the towering sun-dappled canopy of the grand forest, and I immediately catch the faint, subtle tremor in her stride as we push deeper into the wilderness. Gently reaching over to steady her shaking hands, I look at her with sincere warmth, asking if she is frightened and swearing with every fiber of my being that I will protect her from whatever lurks ahead. As we walk side by side, I quietly reflect on the suffocating terror that has consumed my own thoughts ever since realizing the deadly execution hanging over my head. Offering her a gentle, reassuring smile, I softly confess that seeing her get hurt terrifies me infinitely more than anything that could ever happen to myself. A confession that leaves her looking at me, utterly stunned and deeply moved. Her expression softens as she clutches my arm a little tighter, gazing up with wide, hopeful eyes, as she quietly asks if she can truly depend on me when real danger strikes. I nod firmly with an encouraging grin, forcefully burying my own creeping dread, and placing absolute faith in the grueling training I bled through to prepare for this moment. Shoulder to shoulder, we venture further down the shaded woodland path, penetrating deeper into the eerie quiet of the trial grounds. Further up the trail, a small round horned hare sits quietly in the grass, its deceptively fluffy coat sharply contrasted by the single spiral horn protruding from its forehead. Recalling the layout of the trial, I keep our heading locked toward the heart of the forest, where the ancient landmark known as the Sacred Stone awaits the final objective, where we must retrieve a fragment to prove our worth. A sudden, clumsy rustle from the thick underbrush catches my ear, and I quickly deduce the noise belongs to the rookie estate guards assigned to shadow our movements from the shadows. She casts an anxious glance toward the dense tree line, unaware that more than a dozen elite guard knights are secretly blanketing our perimeter to ensure nothing goes wrong. Leaning close, she nervously whispers that an unsettling gaze is tracking us through the trees, but I casually brush it off as mere forest ambiance, deliberately keeping her from stressing over our overzealous watchers. Resting my hand lightly on my blade with a reassuring grin, I privately marvel at the terrifying sharpness of her innate magical instincts, able to pinpoint hidden knights that even seasoned warriors might overlook. Flustered by the perceived danger, she shyly presses closer against my side, softly pleading for me to keep a close eye on her as we continue along the forest trail. Back in the thick foliage, the hidden knights exchange relieved glances, practically offering a silent prayer of gratitude to me for covering up their clumsy stealth and saving their professional dignity. Without warning, a sharp, violent thrashing erupts from the brush directly ahead. I immediately drop into a combat stance, a jolt of pure adrenaline hitting my veins as a glistening horn bursts through the foliage, my heart screaming that my destined executioner has finally arrived. But instead of a towering nightmare, a plump, stubby horned hare waddles awkwardly into the clearing and lets out a tiny, high-pitched squeak, leaving both of us blinking in bewilderment at its harmless display. Lowering my stance just a fraction, I cautiously warn her that despite its comically adorable appearance, this beast is actually an aggressive, lethal predator that should never be taken lightly. As if on cue, the creature's cute facade violently shatters. It barks a savage snarl and launches itself through the air like a lethal projectile, aiming its razor-sharp horn directly at her throat. Moving entirely on pure instinct, I step cleanly between them and draw my blade. In a blinding flash, unleashing a devastating horizontal strike that slices through the beast cleanly mid-flight. The defeated creature collapses lifelessly onto the grass, the immediate threat vanishing into thin air as an eerie calm settles back over the sunlit clearing. We stand in absolute silence over the motionless beast lying across the woodland dirt, where I note with quiet satisfaction that my strike extinguished its life cleanly, leaving the ground unstained by a single drop of blood. Crouching beside the fallen predator, I explain that I purposely used a refined internal strike to spare her from witnessing a gruesome, bloody scene while she gazes down at the creature in solemn, contemplative silence. Gently extending her hand toward the lifeless creature, she softly remarks on how vibrant and full of life it had been just moments prior, prompting me to ask with genuine concern if the violent encounter had rattled her. Glancing toward the winding path ahead, she quietly admits that while witnessing sudden death is jarring, she understands that it is an inescapable law of survival in an unforgiving world. A quiet sense of pride swells in my chest, seeing how mature she has grown. Realizing that learning the bitter necessity of taking a life to protect another is precisely what this trial was meant to teach us. I offer her a warm, approving smile, but her eyes remain fixed on her open palm, softly murmuring that it is always heartbreaking whenever something small and defenseless is extinguished. Bringing her hand to her cheek with a distant, chilling gaze, She whispers that she would rather lock away everything she cherishes in an inescapable sanctuary, where nothing could ever touch them, sending an icy shiver straight down my spine. Yet in the blink of an eye, that haunting look evaporates into a bright, cheerful smile, as she casually asks if we should keep moving, leaving cold sweat on my neck, as I wonder if I merely imagined the possessive darkness in her tone. Pushing deeper along the trail, we finally step into a wide clearing where the ancient landmark, known as the Sacred Stone, looms before us, towering majestically amidst the canopy. Raising a small glass vial containing glowing crystalline fragments harvested from the ancient monument, I proudly turn to her and announce that we have officially completed our primary objective. Feeling the physical toll of our long trek, she takes a moment to rest against the roots of a nearby tree, but the tranquil moment is violently shattered by the grating sound of obnoxious voices echoing through the clearing. Three arrogant noble brats push through the thick brush, whining loudly about, losing their way before catching sight of us near the monument, immediately sneering with arrogant disgust, under the assumption that we are mere commoners. Suddenly, one of the boys points an aggressive accusatory finger directly at me, bitterly spitting that his own mother wouldn't stop yelling at him to be more like me back in town. I recall with an awkward pang how local noblewomen constantly weaponized my achievements to scold their spoiled sons, instantly piecing together the pathetic root of this boy's petty resentment. Turning his venomous gaze toward her, the boy's sneer deepens as he loudly mocks her as the cursed crow girl of high society, causing her to flinch and clutch, her clothes in painful humiliation. The three of them erupt into smug, disgusting laughter as they throw vile rumors about her lineage. But the sickening noise instantly chokes in their throats the moment I step forward, locking onto them with pure lethal intent. Suffocated by the bloodthirsty aura rolling off me, their faces drain of color, shrieking in absolute terror as they turn on their heels and flee frantically through the woods while I glare after their retreating backs in burning disgust. A gentle hand rests against my forearm as she softly urges me to stand down, quietly asking if I intervened so fiercely because I thought their petty venom had wounded her. Flashing a calm, unfazed smile, she gently reassures me that she went numb to such pathetic insults long ago, making me realize that my instinctual rage had flared into overdrive. Watching her step gracefully ahead along the sunlit path, a wave of relief washes over me, quietly admiring the impenetrable armor of resilience she has forged against society's hatred. Turning back with an intensely affectionate gaze, she leans in close and softly, whispers that as long as I acknowledge and stand by her, the entire world's hatred means absolutely nothing to her. A bead of nervous sweat trickles down my brow as I stare blankly ahead, caught in utter bewilderment over whether she has truly achieved emotional independence, or if she has just developed a dangerously obsessive attachment to me. Concealed high within the thick canopy above, Gareth and his fellow scout monitor our progress, the latter chuckling that my monstrous combat instincts make their escort duty completely unnecessary. But Gareth remains grim, recalling the dead serious, desperate intensity in my voice before the trial began. The way I had practically begged the knights to intervene without hesitation the second anything went wrong. While his partner relaxes against a branch believing the mission is an easy patrol, Gareth drops to one knee on the forest floor, narrowing his eyes at a set of strange, irregular footprints deeply stamped into the mud. Deeply unsettled by the unnatural depth and shape of the tracks, Gareth decides to press deeper into the forest to rendezvous with the forward scouting unit, leaving his comrade behind to keep watch. His partner merely waves a dismissive hand with a carefree laugh, playfully, mocking the knight commander for being paranoid and assuming the odd tracks are nothing more than a stray beast. But the moment the knights part ways, a grotesque silhouette shrouded in swirling pitch-black miasma silently coalesces within the suffocating brush, just behind them. A suffocating, malevolent pressure blankets the woods as a young boy's face slowly emerges from the darkness, half of his flesh gruesomely consumed by living shadows, a harbinger of an unnatural calamity closing in on the trial grounds. Entirely oblivious to the monstrous nightmare creeping through the trees, I look toward the other children gathering around the sacred stone and cheerfully suggest to her that we collect our things and begin the journey home. Standing beneath the shadow of the towering sacred stone, I watch as the other noble children gradually complete their trials and gather in the open clearing, prompting me to tell her that our business here is done and it's time to return. But the fragile piece is instantly torn to shreds as a terrified boy bursts through the thick brush, his face drained of color as he screams incoherently that something horrifying has happened to his partner, clutching his chest as violent tremors rack his small frame. The boy desperately gasps for air, blabbering that the friend he had been traveling with has vanished into thin air without leaving a single trace. He stammers out how his friend had suddenly stopped responding, staring blankly ahead, while muttering eerie, hollow words about going home, which frightened him so badly that he took off running in sheer panic. Swallowed by guilt, the boy had eventually doubled back to search for him. While I listened carefully to his frantic story, initially assuming the missing child had simply succumbed to fear and tried to wander back toward the entrance. But my stomach drops when the boy reveals that upon returning, he saw his missing friend completely surrounded in the trees by heavily armed men, guards I immediately recognize as our own family's elite escort knights. Realizing that an unnatural and dangerous anomaly is breaking out in what was supposed to be a tightly controlled trial, I step forward and sternly order the surrounding children to stay together in the clearing while I move out to investigate. Turning back toward her, I gently ask that she remain by the sacred stone, where it's safe while I track down the missing child. But she immediately turns her face away, pouting in sharp disapproval at the thought of being left behind. Softening my tone, I take her hand into mine and swear that I will return before she even realizes I'm gone, gently coaxing her until she reluctantly gives in and relents with a quiet nod. Looking into my eyes with tender concern, she softly warns me not to take any reckless risks, to which I offer a bright, confident grin, promising once more that I will be right back by her side. I plunge directly into the dense undergrowth, shouting at the top of my lungs for the patrol knights to signal their location, only to be answered by an unnatural, deafening silence. An eerie, suffocating stillness blankets the ancient trees, swallowing every trace of life as not a single knight responds to my desperate calls. My breath turns ragged as I push through the tangled roots and thickets, a creeping dread knotting in my stomach upon realizing that the entire sector is utterly deserted. Not a single footprint, guard, or beast in sight. Halting in the brush, I try to convince myself that the knights simply escorted the frightened boy back via an alternate trail, debating whether I should cut my losses and immediately retreat back to her side. But as I turn on my heel, cold horror seizes my chest. The forest path has completely vanished, replaced by an unfamiliar twisted nightmare of distorted trees and pitch-black gloom with no way back. Back at the sacred stone, one of the lingering noble boys anxiously shifts on his feet, nervously asking her if she is genuinely certain that I will be all right out there all on my own. Resting with an aura of serene composure, she calms the trembling boy, reminding him with quiet pride of how effortlessly and ruthlessly I had cut down every lethal beast that crossed our path earlier. Gazing out toward the blackened tree line, an unshakable devotion anchors her soul, completely certain that I will never break my oath to return to her. Watching her unwavering expression, the boy offers a teasing smile, casually pointing out just how deeply she treasures me, catching the young noblewoman completely off guard and painting her cheeks in a sudden, delicate crimson. As the child playfully chuckles about the two of us being practically inseparable, she averts her eyes with a shy, flustered warmth, quietly turning over the overwhelming weight of the feelings blooming in her chest. Composing herself with practiced grace, she softly brushes aside the embarrassment and offers a polite apology for the chaotic ordeal, even as every ounce of her focus remains desperately tethered to my survival. Deep within the suffocating darkness of the corrupted woods, I force my racing pulse to slow, scrutinizing the twisted, unnatural geometry, warping the forest around me with calculated focus. The chilling truth becomes undeniable. I am trapped inside a high-tier bounded field, or spatial distortion, a level of forbidden sorcery that no wild beast in these trial grounds could ever dream of casting. Scanning the distorted gloom for any magical fissure or structural weakness in the barrier, my mind burns with desperate worry for her safety as I search for a way to break through this deadly cage. Through the thick haze ahead, the motionless silhouette of a solitary child catches my eye, prompting me to cautiously close the distance and ask if he is the missing boy from the trial. But as the figure slowly turns, a grotesque, sickening sneer splits across its face. Its human flesh violently tears and dissolves away, erupting into a monstrous vortex of writhing, pitch-black shadow flames. Instinct screams that this thing is an unnatural abomination. And without a second's hesitation, I flood my palm with raw mana, violently igniting an intricate magical crest between my fingertips. Driving my hand forward, I unleash a catastrophic burst of concentrated arcane energy, triggering a thunderous explosion that shreds the forest floor and completely swallows the entity in a blinding inferno. But as the suffocating smoke rolls away, my blood turns to ice. Towering amid the scorched earth stands a grotesque, pitch-black nightmare, completely unharmed by the blast, locking onto me with hollow, incandescent eyes that freeze me in paralyzed shock. Paralyzed in the suffocating gloom of the clearing, icy sweat traces a line down my neck as the towering obsidian abomination looms directly over me. Its hollow, incandescent eyes drill into my skull while mangled, distorted syllables scrape from its throat into the dead silence. In the span of a single heartbeat, the monstrosity lunges with terrifying speed, its razor-sharp talons carving through the air and forcing my body to move on. Pure, desperate adrenaline to evade the decapitating strike. The air pressure alone from the swipe violently shears straight through a massive oak behind me, sending tons of wood crashing into the dirt with a thunderous roar as I stare in sheer disbelief at its inhuman physical power. Gritting my teeth so hard they threaten to crack, I draw my sword just in time to parry another bone-crushing blow, my mind screaming in frustration over how an apex nightmare like this could possibly exist in a trial designed exclusively for fledglings. Sparks detonate across the gloom as steel violently clashes against claws in a relentless flurry. The entity lets out a sickening guttural cackle that echoes through the canopy while every muscle in my body tears under the strain of matching its onslaught. Leaping backward to tear some distance between us, my chest heaves with ragged breaths as the grim reality sets in. Dragging this into a war of attrition is suicide. I have to obliterate this thing in a single decisive strike, channeling every ounce of mana into my weapon. A roaring crimson inferno violently wraps around the steel, superheating the air as I prepare to unleash the most devastating offensive spell in my arsenal, Grand Blaze. Rocketing forward in a violent burst of speed, I drive a scorching crescent arc clean through the monster's core, engulfing its shadowy form in a blinding tempest of raging flames and churning ash. Collapsing to one knee on the scorched earth to suck air into burning lungs, a sickening knot tightens in my gut as I realize my strike passed through it. Without meeting the resistance of actual physical flesh, through the swirling embers, a waking nightmare unfolds. Its severed head hangs unnervingly in midair, hollow eyes throbbing with dark malice as shadowy fibers violently stitch its mutilated corpse back together, all while its distorted voice endlessly whimpers broken pleas of wanting to go home. Before I can launch a follow-up strike, an unnatural gale of blistering wind violently rips through the clearing, kicking up a blinding wall of dirt and cinders that forces me to throw my arm across my face. The second the violent wind dies down, I snap my guard back into place and frantically sweep the clearing, only to find the corrupted space completely deserted, the entity gone without leaving behind a single footprint. But before I can even steady my stance or weave a defensive ward, a brutal, unseen impact smashes into my spine, driving me violently face-first into the dirt and driving every last breath from my lungs. Gasping in agony as I roll over to look up, the sight before me freezes the blood in my veins. 3 of our family's elite guard knights tower above me, their expressions swallowed in pitch-black gloom and their eyes completely dead and vacant. Without a shred of hesitation, one of the entranced soldiers swings his heavy broadsword straight for my skull, forcing me to detonate a raw, desperate blast of Grand Blaze to deflect the blade and scramble backward through the mud. My hands shake against the hilt as I retreat, watching their rigid, unnatural movements as the horrifying reality settles into my chest. The Count's most loyal, veteran knights have been completely hijacked like hollow puppets. Stepping out from the darkness behind the compromised men, the amorphous shadow entity materializes once more, radiating a sickening, suffocating miasma as it resumes its broken, maddening chant to find its way home. Locking eyes with the abomination, the full scope of the disaster becomes horrifyingly clear. Not only was it completely impervious to high-tier flame magic, but it possesses a high-level psychological curse capable of enslaving trained knight commanders in seconds. Knowing fire is useless, I instantly pivot my focus, weaving mana into a razor-sharp crescent of compressed atmosphere and launching a lethal wind blade, whistling directly toward the floating wraith. Yet to my sheer horror, the creature contorts its fluid, pitch-black mass with nauseating ease, effortlessly bending around the spell and letting the blade shatter uselessly against the trees behind it. But instead of striking back, the creature abruptly pivots and tears through the thick forest canopy at a terrifying velocity, and as I trace the line of its trajectory, my heart violently drops into my stomach when I realize it is heading directly for her. Meanwhile, back in the quiet sanctuary of the clearing, the young noblewoman stands waiting in complete isolation, bathed in the gentle daylight filtering through the leaves as her mind drifts into solitary thought. But the serene silence of the forest subtly warps under the crushing weight of an unseen magical disturbance, signaling a sudden, malignant shift in the reality of the trial grounds. Sitting nearby at the sacred stone, the young boy looks up with an admiring smile, openly praising my bravery and selfless kindness for venturing into the deadly woods to search for a stranger I had never even met. She listens quietly with a subtle, brooding pout, a quiet pang of possessive jealousy flaring in her chest, as she wonders why I am always so willing to risk my life for total strangers. Though she quickly forces the petty thought away, the boy continues rambling on, fondly reminiscing about the close bond he shared with his missing friend. But the moment he tries to describe his companion's personality, a thick, unnatural fog abruptly clouds his mind. A paralyzing chill rips down the boy's spine as his face drains of color. His memories melt into complete nothingness, staring blankly ahead in absolute terror, as he realizes he cannot remember the face, the voice, or even the name of his dearest friend. Witnessing his sudden, erratic panic, her gaze instantly turns razor-sharp with suspicion, immediately demanding how it is remotely possible for someone to completely forget the person they walked beside just minutes earlier. A suffocating dread tightens around her heart as her supernatural instincts scream that I am in lethal danger, just as a solitary silhouette slowly emerges from the shadowy tree line ahead, casually lifting a hand in greeting. The noble boy gasps in profound relief, eagerly pointing toward the newcomer. Under the naive belief that his lost companion has safely returned, completely blind to the hollow, soulless eyes and the grotesque, sickening grin stretching across the child's face as the shadow parasite pilots its new vessel. Pointing toward the forest trail with a breath of pure relief, the young noble boy cries out that his missing companion has finally returned, the very child I had nearly thrown my life away to locate. But as the figure stumbles into the sunlit clearing, a vacant, sickeningly hollow grin stretches across his face, deaf to the scolding of his friend as he extends an icy, unnatural arm toward him. Before their fingertips can make contact, I violently tear through the foliage, bloodied, battered, and covered in grime, screaming at the top of my lungs for the foolish boy to back away. At the sound of my desperate warning, the child's flesh violently disintegrates into a swirling vortex of pitch-black vapor and razor-sharp talons, exposing the full, sickening nightmare to the petrified clearing. Hurling myself directly between the helpless children and the descending horror, I pour every ounce of physical strength into a frantic parry, violently knocking the lethal claws off trajectory in the nick of time. The redirected shockwave tears past us and obliterates the ancient sacred stone. Behind them, detonating the colossal boulder into a catastrophic rain of pulverized stone and blinding dust while the children shriek in deafening terror. Crashing hard against the trembling earth, icy sweat drenches my skin as I look back at the pulverized crater, paralyzed by the sickening truth that had I been a fraction of a second slower, she and the others would have been ripped to shreds. Behind me, the terrified children collapse into frantic sobs, paralyzed with weeping as the towering horned shadow nightmare strides back into the open, its incandescent eyes locked with predatory hunger upon us. Digging my boots into the blood-stained dirt, I raise my practice blade with trembling arms, grim realization setting in that with the children frozen in. Blind terror, orchestrating an escape while keeping this monster contained, is practically impossible. The abomination lunges with ruthless ferocity, bringing a crushing downward claw strike directly against my raised steel with a deafening screech of sparks and grinding force. The sheer monstrous weight behind the impact forces a strangled groan of agony. From my throat, my heels dragging trenches through the mud as I struggle, desperately under the crushing pressure. Accelerating its onslaught, the creature unleashes a merciless storm of sweeping shadow strikes, each concussive shockwave hammering against my fracturing guard, like an iron mallet. I attempt to counter with a desperate horizontal slash, but its fluid, pitch-black mass contorts sickeningly around the edge, letting out a mocking guttural hiss as my steel cuts uselessly through empty vapor. Behind me, the panicked children finally begin scattering in wild disarray. But she remains frozen to the spot, screaming my name in absolute agony as she watches me fight this hopeless, bloody battle completely alone. Refusing to allow this abomination to take a single step toward her, I violently ignite my blade with the roaring crimson fury of Grand Blaze, standing firm as an unbreakable shield between the beast and the girl I swore to protect. With sweat and blood stinging my eyes, I scream over my shoulder with the last reserves of breath in my lungs, desperately commanding her to run for her life, while I hold the line. Yet as I brace for the next collision, the bitter reality crushes my chest. Deep down, I know I cannot kill a monster that continuously regenerates, but retreating means abandoning her to be slaughtered. In that chilling instant, the truth pierces my mind like a dagger. This is the exact divergence point where the childhood companion was destined to die. The fatal moment that inevitably turns her into the story's ultimate calamity. A suffocating wave of despair threatens to drown me as I recall every single year spent bleeding, studying, and breaking my body just to rewrite this moment. Wondering in agony if human effort was truly never enough to defy fate, gritting my teeth through the burning agony as my blade clashes against razor talons. Once more, my soul screams with bitter regret, terrified that all my devotion was utterly meaningless and that I will perish without fulfilling my sacred vow to protect her. Towering over me, the Shadow Fiend's incandescent eyes widen in sadistic delight. A spine-chilling, guttural laughter tears from its maw, sending violent waves of cold dread down my spine. Suddenly, blood-curdling shrieks of raw terror erupt from behind me, violently wrenching my attention away from the duel and toward the edge of the woods. She gasps in utter horror as their escape route is completely severed by our own family guards, who emerge from the trees with blank, soulless eyes, blocking every path under the creature's hypnotic puppetry. Seeing her cornered with nowhere left to flee, I throw all regard for my own survival into the wind and scream for her to live, recklessly hurling myself straight into the Shadow Beast's lethal grasp just to buy her a few precious seconds. Watching me throw my life away for her, her mind violently floods with a lifetime of irreplaceable memories. The day I extended my hand in friendship, the solemn oath of loyalty I swore, and every night I held her through the crushing weight of her despair. In the span of a breath, her terror violently mutates into a terrifying possessive fury. Crackling tendrils of obsidian energy bleed violently from her skin, her voice dropping into an ice-cold whisper as she vows that she will never let anyone tear me away from her. With a catastrophic, earth-shattering roar, her forbidden arcana violently erupts, launching a colossal pillar of dark, primordial energy straight through the canopy and plunging the entire clearing into an apocalyptic eclipse of pure blackness. The catastrophic burst of unrestrained devastation swallows the surrounding forest whole, shrouding the obliterated clearing in a suffocating, lethal sea of writhing shadows. I collapse hard onto the dirt, clutching my throat in agonizing torment as the catastrophic pressure of her magical storm strips every last molecule of oxygen from the clearing, leaving my lungs screaming in burning suffocation. With my vision rapidly tunneling into absolute darkness, I force my battered body upright by leaning heavily on my sword, desperately weaving a faint wind spell to drag a single sliver of breathable air into my chest while apocalyptic tendrils of shadow rage wildly around us. Pitch-black tendrils of residual shadow magic drift silently from the incinerated earth, curling through the sunlight like morning specters over the ruined clearing. An icy chill races down my spine as I recognize the suffocating aura of the destruction. This was the very same apocalyptic magic she was destined to unleash as the tragic final boss of the original story. The devastating force of her unleashed arcana was absolute, a primordial cataclysm designed to erase everything within its reach, yet against all conceivable odds, my fragile body had somehow weathered the brunt of its initial detonation. Looking down at my trembling, blood-soaked hands in stunned disbelief, a ragged gasp of relief tears from my chest upon realizing air is still filling my lungs, while she kneels motionless in the scorched dirt only a few paces away. I force her name past my parched lips, causing her to whip her head around in utter shock. The moment our eyes lock, the ice in her gaze instantly shatters into a fragile storm of raw relief and overwhelming agony. But the second she lunges toward me, the last thread of adrenaline snapping in my veins causes my knees to buckle, sending me crashing violently face first into the dirt as her panicked scream tears through the glade. Collapsing to her knees at my side, hot tears carve paths through the grime on her pale face, her entire body racked with violent tremors under the crushing guilt that her cursed power had destroyed the only person she loved. But the air freezes in my throat as my eyes dart past her trembling. Shoulder deep within the charred tree line, a malevolent silhouette rises from the ash, its glowing eyes proving that the shadow abomination had survived the apocalyptic burst. Exhaustion strangles my voice as my mind races through the grim reality. Torn and bleeding, weaving another spell, or trying to carry her away in flight is far too slow to outrun the predator's incoming strike. Accepting the merciless reality of what must be done to keep her breathing. Every ounce of hesitation vanishes from my soul, replaced by the quiet, absolute resolve to serve as her living shield. As the beast lunges with a lethal descending claw strike, I throw my entire weight over her trembling frame, wrapping my arms tightly around her head, and taking the full flesh-tearing brunt of the blow across my own back. I stagger on my feet beside her, crimson pouring heavily down my body as she stares up at me in paralyzed horror, her voice breaking into hysterical, anguished screams as she witnesses the butchery of my flesh. Drowning in unbearable grief and sickening self-hatred, she clutches her chest and sobs violently, trapped amidst the suffocating dark mist that continues to choke the devastated clearing. Falling backward into the blood-soaked earth, I force my trembling lips into a gentle, reassuring smile, softly whispering for her not to shed another tear, even as the crimson spreading beneath me pools into the dirt. Staring blankly at the deep crimson coating my chest and fingers, a cold, dizzying numbness creeps into my skull, leaving me dazed by the sheer, horrific severity of the wounds carving into my body. She leans desperately over my battered form, her scalding tears splashing against my cold cheek as she cries that this agonizing bloodshed is entirely her fault. But I summon what little breath I have left to whisper that she couldn't be more wrong. Clenching her fists tightly over her aching heart, she screams in bitter torment, cursing the monstrous blood running through her veins and despairing in utter helplessness over her failure to protect the one soul she holds dear. Gazing directly into her shattered eyes with boundless warmth and tenderness, I offer her a faint, unyielding smile, reassuring her that the cruelty of this moment is a burden she was never meant to carry alone. In the quiet depths of my mind, the undeniable truth burns bright. Had she not unleashed that immense, terrifying power when she did, our corpses would already be rotting in the dirt beneath that monster's claws. A wave of profound irony washes over me. After years of bleeding and breaking myself to save her from a tragic fate, it was her power that saved my life today, and that realization fuels an unbreakable resolve to pull her back from the edge of darkness. Lifting my blood-stained hand with shaking fingers, I gently intertwine my grip with hers, locking onto her glistening eyes as I reaffirm my sacred vow to never let go of her hand. Flashing a defiant, determined grin, I promise her that I have no intention of dying in this dirt, swearing that no matter how terrifying her power might seem to the world, I will never fear or abandon her. When she desperately protests through choked sobs that her curse only brings destruction, I grit my teeth against the blinding, white-hot agony in my back and forcefully drag my battered body back onto its feet. Standing tall before her, I remind her with absolute clarity that if her power hadn't halted the aberration in its tracks, every terrified child and every entranced guard in this glade would already be dead. Turning the entire weight of the blame onto my own shoulders, I declare with fierce conviction that the only failure here was my own weakness, that I should have been fast and powerful enough to cut the beast down on my own. Squeezing the hilt of my sword until my knuckles turn white, I recall the solemn pledge I made the day our lives first crossed paths, fiercely rebuking myself, forever being naive enough to think my past efforts were sufficient. Through the grime and crimson staining my face, I flash her a bright, fearless smile, offering a heartfelt apology for my own shortcomings and lack of strength. She looks up at me with wide, glistening eyes brimming with profound awe and trembling concern, softly asking if I truly intend to keep fighting in such a shattered condition. Interlocking my fingers firmly within her trembling grasp, I close my eyes with a serene, unwavering smile, asking her to lend me her strength just this once so we can stand together as one and tear through the darkness before us. Looming before us with incandescent, malevolent eyes, the shadowy abomination stalks forward, and I know with absolute certainty that if she were to unleash another apocalyptic burst of her arcana, we could vaporize the beast in an instant. But looking at her trembling, exhausted frame, I instantly discard the thought. I refuse to force the agony of that corrupting burden onto her fragile shoulders ever again, choosing instead to carry the entire weight of this battle alone. Gripping her small, shivering hand in mine, I make the desperate decision to unseal my ultimate trump card, my hidden celestial power fully braced for the devastating backlash and agonizing torment that will tear through my mortal body. Turning back toward the nightmare with blood dripping from my bruised chin, a defiant smirk cuts across my face as I taunt the abomination for failing to kill me, when it had the chance, declaring that our battle ends right now. A blinding, cataclysmic detonation of primordial light and churning shadow violently erupts, tearing straight through the forest canopy and swallowing the entire battlefield in an overwhelming tempest of pure radiance and suffocating smoke. Time melts away, the chaotic nightmare dissolving into the serene quiet of the estate's infirmary, where I awaken bound tightly in heavy medical gauze beneath the soft, golden glow of the morning sun. Opening my heavy eyelids against a dull, throbbing ache that racks every bone. In my body, I let out a low groan and pull myself upright, catching sight of my heavily bandaged reflection in the sunlit window. Slumped right beside my bed, she rests sound asleep with her head buried against the edge of the mattress, utterly worn out after spending days and nights, vigilantly guarding my bedside. An overwhelming warmth fills my chest as I gently rest my palm against her soft hair, exhaling a quiet breath of relief that I had managed to cheat death and keep her safe from harm. That quiet, unspoken vow became the unbreakable anchor of our lives, an intimacy, immortalized years later, whenever she playfully presses a slender finger against my lips. 5 years slip by in the blink of an eye, and beneath the blazing sun of the estate's grand courtyard, the lightning-fast, high-intensity clashing of steel reverberates off the stone walls under the watchful gaze of the spectating knights above. Sitting flat on the cobblestones with his disarmed sword resting several paces away, Gareth lets out a hearty, impressed laugh and gracefully yields the match. The surrounding garrison erupts into deafening cheers, loudly celebrating the astonishing feat of a 15-year-old boy decisively besting the legendary knight commander in single combat, while I wipe the sweat from my brow with a relieved smile. Catching my breath, my mind drifts back to that bloody afternoon in the forest. 5 years ago, remembering how unleashing my forbidden celestial power had pushed me to the absolute edge of death, soaking the earth in my own blood. Because I had drawn the full lethal brunt of that horror onto myself. The rescue reinforcements had managed to safely evacuate every single noble child from the woods without a single casualty. Official investigations later determined the entity to be an artificial lingering ghost, born from the tragic malice of souls lost in the forest, an anomaly that should have been limited to weak, low-tier trickery. Yet because the abomination possessed the terrifying ability to erase human memories and enslave an entire squad of elite knights, the Count launched a massive inquiry, though the true shadowy mastermind behind the incident was never uncovered. Remembering the brutal lore of the original game, I knew that while I had rewritten the fatal divergence where the childhood friend was murdered, surviving a single crisis was far from a guarantee of safety. Throughout those 5 years of apparent peace, I never allowed myself a single moment of complacency, spending every waking hour mastering the blade, expanding my magical repertoire, and preparing for the next inevitable trial. Suddenly, a breathtakingly radiant figure burst through the courtyard gates. Now a stunning young woman of peerless grace, She immediately rushes toward me, frantically cupping my cheeks with both hands to inspect every inch of my body for injuries. Breaking into a flustered sweat under her intense gaze, a fond smile warms my heart as I realize just how hopelessly doting and overprotective she has remained ever since that day in the forest. Throwing all propriety out the window, she wraps her arms tightly around my chest in the middle of the open grounds, sending my face burning bright red as I desperately plead with her not to embrace me so intimately in front of the entire night order. Her eyes instantly shimmer with exaggerated theatrical sorrow as she softly asks if I have already grown tired of holding her, sending me into a sputtering, desperate panic to reassure her that isn't the case. In a heartbeat, the fake tears vanish into thin air, replaced by a dangerously mischievous smile as she presses her slender finger firmly against my lips, leaning close to whisper that she couldn't care less even if the entire world stood watching us. Completely helpless against her playful boldness, I squeeze my eyes shut in total embarrassment while she giggles softly, poking my burning cheek and thoroughly relishing every second of my flustered reaction. Locking her hand tightly around my wrist, she begins dragging me away from the training field, cheerfully declaring that if I'm so concerned about wandering eyes, we should simply retreat somewhere private where it will be just the two of us. Being dragged away helplessly by my unyielding mistress, I glance back over my shoulder and desperately shout for someone to save me, only for Gareth and the grinning knights to cheerfully wave me off, laughing that I am entirely a lost cause against her charms.